Hi, folks, and welcome to a more civilized age. I'm Matt, and joining me once again in the captain's chair is Chris Nelson. Hello, Chris.
Hello.
The only person besides me who used his own name as his YouTube channel.
I think that just shows how old we are. Yeah.
Nothing to brag about, right? By the way, how is your defunct channel?
Still defunct. Still defunct. Yeah.
Okay.
Kathleen Kennedy still does not.
I'm telling you, still hasn't given you permission.
No.
Oh, man.
No.
Man, that's awful. And then we have from the Star Wars Library, which I don't know if you've posted in a week or so. Spence, how you doing? Welcome.
Doing well. Thanks for having me. I'm borderline defunct as Chris is.
Yeah. Not doing videos. It's almost like you have your own life. That's kind of weird.
I know, and I know that both of you can relate, but man, being a parent, that's a lot of work.
Yeah, tell us.
Yeah.
Chris is leading in that, by the way.
Not for long, Matt. You're about to lap me and kids, as well as now that you're doing the reread, as well as in YouTube channels, right? You're just showing off now. You're gonna review the entire EU twice just because you can.
Someone said, I think we should read along with Matt, but then I realized I can't catch up with that guy. It does in an average week. I could read through a novel in 2 days, given the time, because it's nothing for me to sit down for a couple hours and read. I'd especially if it's interesting, right? So with the expanded universe, it's interesting, and the whole reread thing is really kind of. I've seen a lot of things so far. There's going to be a difference. I'm changing up the timeline a little bit because of one little paragraph that I just overlooked the first time. I'm finding a contradiction that I never would have known about if I wasn't reading in chronological order. And then I'm finding a few other things. The pieces right now, the pieces of the Old Republic fall pretty much in a good order. I didn't realize how structured they were with the timeline, with so much, the video game and so much coming out. I didn't realize how structured they were with that timeline. It shouldn't surprise me because they've been like that with the whole, but Old Republic is not like the Clone Wars where they just jam whatever story they can wherever they can. And that was kind of
what do you mean?
Yeah.
They would never do that.
No, they wouldn't. But after we had signed off on our last More Civilized Age, Chris had brought something up in the lobby to me. And I was like, you're kidding me. I said, that's got to be our next topic by far. We were talking about just the fandom last month, and just it's just kind of what is Star Wars fandom doing? What is Lucasfilm doing with their fans? And is this the way to treat fans? And universally, the answer is a resounding no, it appears. Because arguably, when you think of Star Wars, the arch rival is Star Trek, right? A lot of Trek fans out there. Trek fans love what's called the Prime Universe. That's the original shows and stuff before, the J.J. Abrams movie, right? And that kind of signifies, even though it does give an explanation of what happened to the Prime Universe and whatnot, it basically signals the end of it. However, the beginning of the end, yes. And however, unbeknownst to me, now I didn't know this, but Christopher Nelson is a huge, you just drop off the S, an huge Star Trek fan, I suppose. I did not know this. How did you come? First off, give me your little background on Star Trek, and then give us the news you told me.
Sure. I guess my Trek credentials are that. I mean, I've been following Star Trek as long as I've been following Star Wars. I mean, I was introduced to Star Trek by my mom, who was a big fan of the original series, and I watched the original series in its sort of first wave of reruns when I was a little kid. I remember on our little black and white TV in the kitchen in the morning, or whatever it was that was come on. I have really early memories of it. I mean, I remember distinctly when I was seeing advertisements for this Next Generation show and stuff. So I've always been a huge Trek fan. For me, there was never a battle between Star Wars or Star Trek. They're different. They're equally fun. Now, and by the way, I mean, my other credentials, just to brag, is like I have a fairly extensive Star Wars EU collection, right? But I have just as big of a Star Wars or Star Trek collection. I have every single Star Trek book ever published.
And I think that's incredible. You and I have the same background when it comes to that. My mom watched Star Trek, and back in the 80s, we were watching the reruns. And that was when Dad was away. That was one of the few, if only times, we were allowed to get out the TV dinner trays, and eat dinner in front of the TV, which we never were allowed to do. But if it was Star Trek and my dad wasn't around, yeah.
Fun. By the way, speaking of my mom, I actually, this just happened recently. I only give so many details. I don't want to dox her, but one of the books that came out earlier this summer actually has her family name in it, because the author asked for a suggestion for a ship or a base or something, and I passed it on, so it's in there now. So I actually just, it's coincidentally, I actually just gave her a copy of the book tonight. I saw her and I said, look, your name is now Trek canon, right? So that was pretty cool. So I have kind of now a personal connection to Trek, right?
Wow. I just get my mom a card for her birthday. Wow. Way to up the ante there.
Yeah. By the way, and I just mentioned this before we went live, right? But the fun thing too is, if you're a fan of both worlds, is that because there are a lot of shared authors, Barbara Hamley,
yes.
Bondi McIntyre,
A.C. Crispin.
Yeah, absolutely. There are winks here and there, right, about the connections, and Barbara Hamley fairly clearly sort of alludes to a Han Solo character, as well as one of the doctors from Doctor Who. So there's kind of fun little kind of sprinkles of cameos of other franchises. Anyway, a lot of fun for folks who are a fan of both. Now, as you mentioned, Matt, the 2008 Star Trek sort of quasi reboot sort of was the beginning of the end of what I think some Star Wars fans don't appreciate, was an ongoing literary continuity, right? And so Star Trek books had like fits and bursts for a number of years, but in the early 80s, after the first movie, it got going. You started to see a large number of books sort of about that original crew, right? But after the last movie with the Next Generation crew, that came out in 2002 or whatever it was, I forget.
Yeah,
Nemesis. Yeah. What the publishers decided to do was to continue the story, right? Sound familiar, right? Like what happens after Return to the Jedi? We get to read, 30 more years of stories, and they were all connected. So for years before that, the stories didn't go out of their way to not connect. It's just that they didn't have to connect, right? You couldn't do anything crazy. You couldn't make Spock like, half monkey or whatever, right? Like they had to broadly, and in fact, occasionally things from those books would make their way into the films, right? So like we know what Sulu's first name is because of those old books that didn't have to, line up, but the authors wanted to. Again, just like the EU was the authors bringing, the authors who wanted it to work, right? They were trying their best. But anyway, after Nemesis, there was a formal goal to keep it all connected, with sort of the caveat that the original series stories were always going to be a little bit more freewheeling, largely because there are so many stories now in book form from the original 5-year mission, that it's sort of been estimated that there are more stories than there are 5 years for stories to actually have taken place, right? So it's, at this point, the original series is kind of, it works where it works, and where it doesn't, that's fine. But everything else, right? So there's a Next Generation book series. There was a Deep Space Nine book series, a Voyager book series, a book series on the Enterprise show. And then the really cool thing was lots of original series. So there's an entire series of Riker books where he becomes the captain of the Titan. Amazing series. There's like a Klingon spinoff. And the really cool thing where they really took this to the next level is there's about an 18, 19, 20 volume series called New Frontier. And it's an entirely new character that they structured an entire new book series around, right? So, I mean, they really took their EU, right? To a lot of interesting places. And again, there was a really tight continuity. On my very defunct channel 2 years ago, around October 2019, I did a video about what at the time was the last book in what's sort of known as the Litverse in the Star Wars world. It's called the Litverse. And it's called Collateral Damage, a great book, but left you wanting more. And that was it. A completely unceremonious ending because of the new Picard film, right? Again, sound
Okay, I
familiar?
was going to ask why.
Yeah, it was sort of like our Crucible, right? Where it was just
Right.
out of the blue because of this other thing. There was this perceived sort of like, well, inevitability, it's got to end, but it didn't end with any closure. And that pissed me off and lots of others until it was announced earlier this year. And there had been hints from authors in the Trekverse that they had a plan. And what that plan was a trilogy called Coda, perfectly titled, I think, to wrap it all up, right? So 2 years after the unceremonious and abrupt end of the Litverse, these authors pressed the publishers to give the fans what EU fans want, which is an actual ending. And I just showed you guys earlier, but this is the second of the trilogy. It just came out yesterday. I haven't read it yet, but I've read the afterword. And if you don't mind, Matt, can I read a couple of things here from the afterword?
Go right ahead.
So this is the second volume by James Swallow. It's really neat. He says the Coda series is a waypoint for something unprecedented in the world of tie-in fiction. Star Trek, along with a small handful of other IPs like Star Wars, Doctor Who, Warhammer, and a few others, is in the privileged position of having an ongoing literary component, right, that parallels the source material. And he says, over the years, writers like me have been allowed to play in this vast toy box. Talks about how, as a fan, he wants to see it going and he wants it to connect. One thing I'll editorialize, he slightly sort of gives into what lots of EU authors have said, which is that, well, when Picard came around, since it was set in the future and it wasn't going to, it was just inevitable. Who would expect it to follow the continuity? Well, it's like all of us, right? Or at the minimum, keep it going in parallel. And that's what this book does, right? And he goes on to say that...
real quick, when did this come out again?
This came out yesterday.
Okay, so this is recent.
This is recent, and the final one comes out, I think, next month. But
awesome.
He says, but the Litverse, as readers christen it, was still out there. He's saying after it ended in 2019, it was still out there, with stories unresolved and questions unanswered. Right? Sound familiar? He says, our friends over in the galaxy far, far away had gone through a similar thing when the return of Star Wars signaled the end of that franchise's expanded universe, with their prose stories literally becoming legends. So he's mad on our behalf, right?
Wow.
And he says, rather than follow that model, we, the authors, chose to do something different. We would write a conclusion to bring down the curtain on the stories that we'd been telling, and and reset the clock or whatever. And so, and he talks about the three authors here who are three major and well-respected Star Trek authors. He says they got together and he quotes and he says, if we don't do this, who will, right? Because Paramount CBS had given up on us, the fans. Oh, by the way, I forgot, there was something in here I missed, but he also says specifically, just like what we've said as EU fans, he says, we, the fans and the authors of this Litverse, we are the ones that are entitled to claim that we have kept the franchise going in between the films, right? This Litverse cannot be taken for granted. There wouldn't be a Picard if there wasn't 20 years of... So, by the way, Matt, one reason why I love talking about this is because I've always wanted to throw a little bit of mud on the idea that Star Wars was exceptional for having the continuity, right? Trek had it too, right, in a way, right? It still wasn't the same, but in a way. But again, I have to say, if there has to be a battle in terms of how our IPs being regarded, regardless of whatever else, Star Trek now wins for one reason, because even though it's only 3 books, we have an ending. And that at this point is all I want from the EU. I want one thing to wrap it up, right? And I would be happy.
Right.
Star Trek's done that. Now, again, the thing that still bugs me, I just have to say a final point, is that it still kills me that why can't there be a parallel forever? Why does there have to be an ending, right? But at least they gave an ending. And at this point, oh my gosh, I'll take it, right? So it's so great.
Now, that is great. And it's kind of funny because what they're talking about there, we've been talking about before. We've talked about, at least just give us an ending. Like you said, Crucible wasn't the ending, and they didn't know it was going to be that. And what he's saying is what I'm glad that they're fighting for their fans, and that this is kind of wild. I didn't know these were coming out in such quick succession. They understand that Star Trek fans are going to read this the moment it comes out. That's great.
Yeah.
You see they're coming out like a month in between?
Yeah, that's right.
That's
awesome.
Right. I mean, you don't have to wait for these either.
No, you don't. And but the first one was fantastic, and with real stakes and everything. And I'm so thrilled, after kind of a weird year of EU with extreme highs with Heart of the Jedi and extreme lows with just continued sort of,
fighting with
mishmash,
Lucasfilm.
Yeah, and like all the confusion over how they're going to like remake KOTOR and just all this like kind of bad blood or whatever. Finally, an IP is respected, right? A classic, legendary IP is respected, and I don't want to switch gears, but I just say this happens right alongside other great news in the Doctor Who world too, alongside something that I think has been very unfortunately neglected, which is that the Dragonlance book series is coming back, and that's something too that had been unceremoniously cast aside when Wizards of the Coast purchased, or there was some purchase, right? And the original authors, Margaret Weiss and Hickman, weren't allowed to even buy it back to continue it. They've finally said, go for it. Because again, there's a huge legion of fans out there like us that have been, in fact, there have been tactics that I have done as an EU fan that I learned from the Dragonlance movement. Because they've been fighting it for just as long. So anyway, but they've got it back. So Dragonlance, Doctor Who's coming back in a way, or there's a sort of a reigniting a certain spark. But again, all these franchises except the EU. It's depressing.
Yeah. Now we'll talk about Doctor Who and what's going on there in a minute, because that's another thing that you mentioned to me after our last show. But Spencer, what are your thoughts about all this? How close did you follow Star Trek, and then what do you think about this news about Coda?
I think it's fantastic. I mean, I did not know that they would mention Star Wars in that.
Right, I had no idea either.
That's incredible. I mean, here's the thing with me. I've never been a huge fan of Trek. My dad loves it, and he actually got my mom into it. And so from what I remember as a kid, I remember The Next Generation just because LeVar Burton was Geordie LaForge, and I was a big fan of Reading Rainbow as a kid. So it was, and then it was cool because then on Reading Rainbow, they did a Star Trek episode where he took you to the set and did a behind the
he
scenes.
showed you how the tractor beams work.
Yes.
Stirring the glitter in the water.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
I remember this.
So I mean, I've at least kind of, not as hardcore, I'm sure it's obviously YouTube, but at least have like an awareness. Like I know who these characters are. I know like, different things. And then mom and dad would even always be like, oh, you should watch it. Now we're on Voyager. Now we're doing this. And so I'm like, I don't know. But, and so for me, it was a little bit more fun to watch at least the first J.J. Abrams movie, just because, again, I didn't have that, I guess, that connection to the original series and to all that stuff. So me, it was kind of like, oh, cool, this is a cool action movie. But I, obviously hearing from the hardcore Trekkies who are like, no, this came in and it wiped it, like we blew up Vulcan. And that ticked a lot. I know that ticked a lot of fans off. And so, but the fact is that, but I have a respect for it, I guess is what I should say. It's a neat series, but and I never read any books though, just because, again, similar to what I think you guys had said before, it never was that consistent thing as much, I guess, is probably the better way to say it than the EU. I think, Matt, in your origin story, you said something along the lines of this book contradicted that. Again, I haven't read them, so correct me if I'm wrong.
Right. Yeah. What had happened is I was reading one of the Star Trek. This is one of the older ones, and it contradicted something that was said in the TV show. And I pointed that out. And she goes, well, the books kind of go their own way. And I was like, oh, well, then why would you want to read it? Now, to Chris's point, though, there have been certain sections or runs of novels that make sure they connect to everything. And it's here and there. But you have the 3 books that William Shatner someone ghost wrote for William Shatner.
Yeah.
somewhere in there, and other little.
That's its own. That's officially the Shatnerverse. That is
Yeah,
officially out of continuity. But
Oh,
but
okay.
its
Okay.
own universe. That's what I'm
yeah,
saying. There's
right.
like little mini sub universes under
Mhm.
this too.
Gotcha.
I mean, but yeah, they do try to stay together.
Yeah.
And what these authors are doing here is they're finishing off obviously the main and the popular storyline that people were wanting. Now, Chris, you didn't know about the second issue yet. You hadn't read the forward yet, so you didn't know about this until you just recently read this. And so you got to be thinking, wow, someone gets us. Because after years of Lucasfilm just turning a deaf ear and not even acknowledging that there are fans out there, for Coda to say, yeah, there are fans out there who loved their expanded universe and now it's gone. Wow, it's nice to know that Star Trek fans are listening. It's just
Totally.
too bad that Lucasfilm can never admit that we don't even exist. They don't even want to talk that we even exist.
Right. And just like the EU, though, I mean, these writers are fans too, right? And in the way that like a lot of the early EU authors, like they wanted continuity because they were fans too. They wanted to know what happened next, so they're in a position to sort of help. Where I think again, the Trek authors, and I'm shocked I'm saying this, and I mean, again, in the Trek Star Wars battles, if I had to choose, I'm a Star Wars guy. I don't think there's any question, but just slightly, right? But if I'm feeling like the scales shift a little bit because here's where they, again, not only do we have a closure, but it's the authors themselves who said, I'm not going to take no for an answer. We're going to come up with ideas. We're going to go back to the license holder and we're going to make this happen. Where were the EU authors saying, excuse me, where's Troy Denning saying, Star Wars doesn't end with Crucible. If I'd known that, I would have done it differently. Give me a chance, So instead, what do? They go, oh, well, hey, Lucasfilm could always do whatever it wanted. Disney bought it. It's their prerogative, as if that was an argument. So, thank God these guys had the guts to say no. And by the way, in all fairness, maybe it's because they saw what happened to us and they saw it sucks, right? So.
And who's to say that someone did not? I will grant that. Maybe someone tried, said, hey, so will we get to finish our story? No, and shut up. Okay.
Right.
That also could have happened. But the same way, these guys had to be persistent. And I'm guessing, I wonder how long their persistency was, because they could have come out with these a long time ago. Know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
But yet now, several years after J.J. Abrams' first movie, they're finally bringing these out. Good for them. I'm not condoning them for this. I'm just saying that good for them to finally do it. But I bet they had to push for who knows how long.
Sure. And it's interesting too. And again, I've got to give a lot of credit to the license holders and Paramount and PBS and CBS, whoever else sort of ultimately owns this stuff, for allowing this to happen. Because one thing we've always said on the EU side is, give the new movies a chance, give some of the new stuff a chance. Give it a chance to sort of do its thing. Then when there's a little bit of breathing room, we get our chance to do it. Right. Meanwhile, they've got 1,000 new stupid shows that are supposedly called Star Trek, which I don't watch, that are again, precisely because they're not part of this continuity. They don't feel like Star Trek. They're pumping out media times left and right to these things. In other words, this is a Star Trek competitor to other Star Trek work, right? And yet, out of the integrity for the fans and for the story, the company still said go for it, right? That's something that Lucasfilm has for years said, well, no, like, we don't want the competition. We don't want to compete with ourselves. Meanwhile, the Star Trek owners are kind of like, like we do this for the fans, I guess, right?
More the merrier. Are there fans that want to buy it? Then yes.
Yeah.
It's called common sense these days. But yeah, no, I totally agree with that. So that was interesting news. Now the second half that you were talking about was Doctor Who. Now, I want to ask Spence again. Spence, do you keep up with Doctor Who? Are you familiar with Doctor Who? Did you watch it?
This is another topic that unfortunately I don't know too much about. Again, I've been hearing it from other people. I know essentially the gist, and I kind of know where the fan, I guess, backlash has happened, at least in certain issues when it comes to the writing. But as for, again, knowing the content as well, not as much.
Right. So you know that Doctor Who is on first.
and Doctor What's
Doctor
on
What
second,
is on second. I'm just.
and I don't know is on third.
Third
But we're not
base.
talking about him.
No, we're not. No, we're not. Okay, I'm sorry to make fun of it, but Chris is also, folks. We're learning more about Chris in this episode. Is what we're doing here. Chris is also a big fan. I'm not a Doctor Who fan. My nephews absolutely love Doctor Who, but I've never was a fan. I mean, just never got into it. I wouldn't say never a fan. I don't hate Doctor Who. I'm just unfamiliar with it. But what you were telling me about Doctor Who, go ahead and tell me what's. And this is also recent as well.
It is, yeah. And here's my Doctor Who credentials. You're learning all sorts of things about me. So I also watched Doctor Who from a very early age. There were reruns.
Was it your mom's influence?
Actually, it was, yeah. She's a huge sci-fi person. Yeah, no. So, but I saw some of the early episodes when they would occasionally make their way to North America, often on like PBS channels and things like that. So I remember watching that as a little kid. Spent a lot of time in the UK too, and still do, and which is where I sometimes have to get Doctor Who stuff because it's impossible to find it in any reasonable sort of time frame in North America. I mean, there's a monthly magazine and it takes like 3 or 4 months to get over here. It's a real shame. But anyway, I also have every Doctor Who book ever published. Although that's a little trickier because Doctor Who has an enormous wealth of quasi fan fiction stuff that is still very respected and sort of broadly considered sort of quasi canonical. So I've made a decision not to go all the way down that rabbit hole. Anyway, so I have a lot of books. I have about 7,000 books, mostly Star Wars, Star Trek, and Doctor Who. Anyway, those are my credentials. Seen every episode. And in fact, they just reissued them on Blu-ray. I've got a bunch of them. Anyway, so all to say that there are two major sort of eras. There's the classic era and there's the new era. The new era, it went off the air for about 19 years and came back in 2005. The show feels really different in lots of ways, but there's still a lot of there's a lot of regard given to the early era. The thing about continuity and canonicity in Doctor Who is the Doctor is a time traveler. So anything can be reworked. Okay, so that's always the ultimate loophole. Now there is a vast sort of expanded universe, so to speak, of Doctor Who materials, books, comics, and Big Finish audios, by the way. Anyway,
by the way, Big Finish audios there's a lot in that genre there. Big Finish did Highlander.
Yes, in fact, there's some on eBay right now. By the way, go check it out. Yep.
Look out. Do it. Okay, but anyway, go. Every time I look for Big Finish, I only find Doctor Who stuff and not Highlander.
Yeah.
Stuff.
Well, the interesting
that's really big too. I've noticed.
A quick aside, and Big Finish, for anyone who doesn't know, it's a British company that they do these original audio dramas, not just Doctor Who, but lots of other things. And actually, one of the guys who started it, Nick Brigg, is now the voice of the Daleks on the TV show. So he's one of the voice of the main baddies or whatever. So he's kind of connected. Big Finish, by the way, quick aside, a couple of years ago, they did a couple of audio novelizations of a Star Trek miniseries, which is kind of interesting. And the fact that they play a major role, and particularly pre-2005 when the show came back, played a major role in being one of the main sort of voices of the continuing stories of Doctor Who, got me thinking, maybe they're a great outlet for future EU. Right, so just do it as audio form. I hope someone's talked to them about that. Anyway, I think it was about a month ago. It's hard to say. I'm still sort of reeling from the news. The person who brought the show back in 2005, Russell T Davies, who had left in 2010, it was announced he's coming back. So he's going to come back to run the show. He's going to do the 60th anniversary next year, or in 2023. And then they say, and he'll be doing the series, the seasons after that. This is humongous news for a variety of reasons, because if you like the new series, if you like the fact that Doctor Who is popular again, if you like the fact that it was ever on, 2005, it's all because of him, right? He brought the show back through willpower. He was a fan like the EU authors who were fans of Star Wars, etc. So he brought it back. He's made it what it is today. But yeah, as Spencer alludes, there are fans who are unhappy with elements of the current show. I think a lot of the sort of the angrier sort of hot take sort of internet culture is sort of focused on the particular actress playing the role, because the Doctor is now a female for the first time ever. And I think people think that was just a woke SJW decision, whatever. I don't really care about that. I don't think the show's been great, but it's because of the writing and the direction, not because of the actress. I don't think any actor has ever failed at playing Doctor Who because you just basically get to play yourself. But if you don't get good scripts, there's a problem, right? Anyway, though, Russell T Davies is coming back, and that's good news for the fans.
No, that's very good. And again, once again, there's another example of them knowing, hey, we've lost our way, we've lost our connection to the fans.
Yeah.
What can we? And here's a company thinking straightforward. What can we do to get that, loyalty back? This is something where you've seen Star Wars struggle as a franchise. They're not the end game as they once were, but yet you don't see any olive branches going to the fans like there are in Star Trek and in Doctor Who. Now, by the way, before I get bombarded with comments on this video, who is your favorite Doctor?
Oh my God, that's like asking.
And while you're at it, which one is your favorite child?
Exactly. Yeah, that's a good question. I think. That's tough. That's really tough, because it changes. I mean, again, I it's not a cop out, but I mean, I don't dislike any of them, right? That's the thing. I don't dislike any, right? And so it just depends day to day. I mean, I think from the classic era, and honestly, my answers aren't that very interesting and people who are really into Who will find these answers very normy. But I think from the classic era, it's Tom Baker, who was the fourth Doctor. He's probably the most iconic of that era. Matt, he's the one with the long scarf. I'm sure you know that, right?
I know who you're talking about.
From the current era, probably Peter Capaldi, who was the Doctor before this female Doctor. What was neat about him was he was kind of older and a little grumpier. And I don't know if you've ever seen Malcolm Tucker, which is a BBC show with actor Peter Capaldi. It's incredible, and all he does in that is swear and make lots of crude comments to people and stuff. So it was so cool to see him take over what was perceived to be just sort of a kiddie show and bring sort of that sensibility to bear. So.
Yeah, and this doesn't surprise me for someone who likes Sean Stewart from Dark Rendezvous.
The best book of the EU.
So
by the way, though, I got to say, even though the current, the last two series of Doctor Who, the last two seasons have not been the best, there were a couple episodes last season that I thought were unmissable. They were amazing. I have to say, once again, the EU, this is something we know as EU fans, right? Don't put all your eggs into the TV basket, right? The books have been incredible. The comics have been incredible. I mean, this thing came out last year during the government lockdowns, right? It's called Adventures in Lockdown. And basically all of these classic people, including Russell T Davies, who's the guy who brought the show back and who's going to take over again, they wrote all these original stories just to try and keep people, entertained while they were, forced to stay at home or whatever.
That's great.
And it's amazing. And again, it's whether it's all exactly in continuity. Here's the thing with Who and the expanded universe of Who, it's all got the feel, it's got the spirit. They all want to expand our imagination about these characters, right? And so there's just so much love being put back into it that you may not see on film, right? But you see in the audios certainly, and in the books and the comics, right? It's it turns out to be a great time to be a Doctor Who fan, and it's a shame that a lot of folks on the internet think that it's all going downhill. The Russell T Davies coming back is just sort of the cherry on top of what's in fact actually been a pretty good period. But
I feel like we're the grounded kid that has to sit inside their room looking outside, watching all their friends play. It seems like every other franchise is treating its fans with respect, is trying to connect to them, where the fandom in Star Wars, Lucasfilm, mocks fans, ignores fans, blames fans when things go wrong, takes credit when they don't. It's like it's an abusive relationship here. And you're right. What Star Trek fan, and I'm going to let you speak. Spence. But what Star Trek fans are, or what those authors did, and how they acknowledge the fans, I agree with you. That's hats off to them. A lot of respect. And it's got to make Star Trek fans extremely happy that this is coming about. Okay, Spence, go ahead.
You're good. No, it's just interesting that you say that, feeling like the kid who is grounded and can't play. Because I remember when they first relaunched the canon in Star Wars, I remember it was easy, at first being like, oh, I'm not going to do this or I'm not going to do that. But when Force Awakens came around, it kind of sucked because it was like, here is this first major Star Wars product or film, I guess, that everyone is talking about, not just the little circle of friends. And so it was hard. And so I kind of gave into the hype a little bit and ended up seeing Force Awakens. And similar to how Chris was describing, some, kind of being disenfranchised with some like Trek stuff and Who stuff, it felt like that too. It's like I was never going to consider it canon anyways. Right. But even then, it was like I don't even care. It just didn't feel like Star Wars, and so that was kind of that immediate. So that's what it has felt like. And going off, I guess, of that is something that I've really liked. That because for me, I really love like Marvel. I think I've made that no secret in stuff. One of the things that Marvel did, and I've been reading it, because one of the first series that I read was the symbiote Spider-Man stuff in the 80s. Mm-hmm. Well, they've been putting out recently symbiote Spider-Man stories that I've been reading, and it takes place during the 80s continuity. Right. So, like, they're wearing 80s style clothes. It is drawn, and it looks like it's during those amazing Spider-Man issues in the 80s. And so for me, I'm like, that's really cool. They're sticking to the feel of that era of Spider-Man. And so, and again, Marvel and DC have got a gajillion of continuities. DC, probably a lot. They have a gajillion Earths. Right. Marvel has their 616. They have the MCU. They have Ultimate Noir 2099. They have tons of stories that they're putting out that take place in like 2099 still. That was in the 90s. So I guess, again, it goes back to if Marvel, DC, Doctor Who, Star Trek, it's baffling to me. Like, we can have these tons of different alternate timelines that continue to tell stories, but Star Wars is being so stubborn, or Lucasfilm is being so stubborn in saying, well, I guess we got a silver lining with Visions being defined as, oh, that's its own thing. It's not Legends. But at the same time, it's like, okay, but who cares? Like, now you've got, okay, so now you're saying you've got like what? You got two, and then you've got an empty sandbox. Why can't you it's two,
Well, to be honest, that wasn't even a nice comment, because they didn't want to feel like they were giving Legends fans anything, is why they made that statement. They didn't want Legends fans getting excited, because they don't want to cater to them. It's a.
I mean,
go ahead.
I was going to say, Star Wars went from, of all the franchises ever, the most cohesive, and consequently, that was one of the things that made it so extraordinary. And now it's the least innovative, right? And
the most cohesive and in touch with their fans.
That too, absolutely.
I cannot. Mm-hmm. I'm going to go back and talk about the forums again. The Lucasfilm employees were there. The Sue Rustoni was there. Steve Sansweet was there. They were talking to you. Leland Shee was addressing you. These people who wouldn't dare give you any of the time of day now were all right there in the forums chatting with authors. We're chatting with you. They were calling you tally fans when you talked about how their story sucked. I kind of miss those days.
They even let you. I was just going to say, they even let you name Jason Solo Sith identity.
Yeah. A lot of integration with the fan sites, some original EU sort of first appears in like fan sites and stuff.
Retcons being made because of what fans call it in the forums. But Chris, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, kind of on that note again, in fall 2019, when the Star Trek Litverse ended, right? I was in a lot of Star Trek forums. These authors, the authors of this trilogy, I was complaining about what had happened, and I kept saying, guys, this happened to the EU. We've got, and the authors were there in those forums with us, the fans, and they said, we've got a plan. We hear you. They said, we've got a plan. It's
That's
great.
Nice.
Now, if you were in a Lucasfilm forum, they'd say, well, I mean, all this.
There are no plans at this time. The end of conversation.
Yeah. Can I just brag on Doctor Who too, real quick, just to show what a
go right
vibrant
ahead.
time it is. Again, just
we
rub it
haven't
in
talked about
Lucasfilm's
much about
face.
Star Wars. I hope people are going to enjoy this one, but
Oh,
I've
no,
enjoyed
not at
it.
all.
Go ahead.
Good. So these are 2 books. This is part of a little mini series that started last year called, it's a subtitled The Time Lord Victorious. Okay. These are the 2 books from it. What's interesting about this, just again, from the context of continuity, is this was an official planned out. So there's 2 books. There was a 2-part comic series, which I've got here, multiple Big Finish audio dramas, a t-shirt, and a toy line that all connect. The t-shirt you need to get to unravel a clue, right? All of those things are integrated, right? So it's just like,
that's cool.
Everyone is showing up the old EU, right? And it's like Lucasfilm doesn't care, they're not, it's just odd, super odd. Everyone is outdoing Star Wars now, in the sense, right? Except Star Wars, who showed the way, in the first place.
Exactly. No, great point. Spence, anything to add?
I don't know. I mean, it's just, I guess I just sit here and I think, why not do that? I think that they have seen, based on billboards, I would love to even be like, look, the Star Wars fandom even got a name drop in a Star Trek novel in the afterword. So why? I guess I don't know. I guess I feel like I'm just going to start ranting.
If the authors were to get permission to finish a story, what would you want to read about?
The entire expanded universe, or just the?
I'm talking the expanded universe. It's okay. What do you want to see? Like, this is the end. What do you want to see? I think Chris and I have answered this before. Didn't we talk about this in a previous? So, yeah. I think we did. I'll repeat mine in a minute, but go ahead, Spence.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to see a couple of things. Obviously, the fate of the big 3, being obviously Luke, Han, and Leia. To me, I've had my own thoughts of. I don't know how Leia would go. I've always envisioned Han going out with the Falcon or going out in a blaze of glory. Luke would probably die peacefully. That's just how I've envisioned it. So I'd like to see them kind of end.
Right.
I guess I'm using Star Trek's example of using 3. So that would be the first thing. Number 2, I'd love to see what ultimately led to the division between the Solos and the Skywalkers come like the Legacy books.
Right.
How Jaina, I think all of us would say that as one of our things, where Jaina and Jagged go off and do their thing. We get the Felt Dynasty and all that. And then ultimately leading into Cade Skywalker and Anya Solo. Number 3 would be the final, as much as I would hate to do this, and I agree with what Chris said, which was, in a perfect world, it would just go on forever as a parallel to the new one. But if it had to be an ending, then I would want to see the final bow to say, and the Skywalker and Solos lived happily ever after, for lack of a better term, I guess, is to kind of somehow put an ending where the Sith are completely destroyed. There's still the light and the dark side, but the Sith are completely gone. The Jedi go on and do their thing. And peace is finally, there's no more wars. Hence why there's the ending, because there's always been wars in Star Wars. There's no more war. It's finally a peacetime where that would be a reason for it not to continue on, because it's no longer, there's no wars anymore.
You'd like to buy the world a Coke? And I'm kidding. No, I get what you're saying. Good one. Sorry, I'm just making stupid jokes right now. Anyway, no, that's great. Chris?
You actually froze, and I just heard buy the world a Coke.
Oh, I did?
I don't know if Chris heard that too.
Yeah, you froze too, but I think I get the reference. You just want there to be happy time, everyone holding hands.
Yeah.
No, do you know what I like about that, Spence? Is that when you think about the original context for Star Wars, right, as from the Adventures of Luke Skywalker, ripped from the Journal of the Wills, right? It was the Star Wars was just one part of the galactic history, and in a way, I like what you're saying. Let's put it. This is just one chapter in this journal, right? So that's kind of a neat way of ending it, which then opens up possibilities for a future era that doesn't have to be sort of so war focused. But yeah, I mean, obviously there's lots of loose ends and hanging threads and stuff that I want wrapped up. I've said specifically what I would recommend if I were in charge would be a series of about 4 or 5 Tales style books, basically Tales from the Clone Wars, resolve all the contradictions, Tales from the Legacy era to do what you do, Spence, to sort of try and connect the comics to, the Crucible era, things like that, right? Tales from the Old Republic, get Karpyshyn to come in and talk more about Zan or whatever. But fundamentally, the framework for me would be to just connect a few more of the big sort of like missing, the big obvious things. Again, like from Crucible to Legacy, what happens, right? Just things like that. If I'm just being realistic, my broad framework would be just, put a little bow on it. And by the way, I've thought about the big 3 too, and I think you're absolutely right. Han has to die with the ship. I see Luke going out like Obi-Wan, sacrificing himself in some way for some future Jedi. But I think that Leia should die peacefully so that, she gets what her mom didn't get, right? Just a peaceful death, right? I think that would be nice. That would be poetic, but.
Yeah, for me, it's just, and I've always said this, if it was one thing, I want to see the connection from Crucible to the Legacy comic books. I want it to be where Cole Skywalker is teaching Cade some lessons right before the invasion comes, the Sith invasion comes, it kind of ends where the comic book picks up. And if they could give us some adventures, that we're talking a couple of books here. You can't just do that in one series. I realize that. Mm-hmm. But if I could have seen that, tied up, I'd have been happy. Mm-hmm. But there you go. So my question to everyone who's watching this in the comments, let us know, what do you think did you know about this news about Star Trek and what Star Trek Paramount and everyone is doing for their fans? Did you know about the Doctor Who stuff and what they're doing for their fans? Chime in. Let me know. You can't just like Star Wars. You must also, some of you also are like Chris, who likes Star Trek and Doctor Who. And then even if you didn't like any of that, how would you, what would, if you could only have one story told, what would that story be? Or 3 points of stories there. What would you want if the expanded universe really had to end? How would you want it to finish or go out the bang? Because right now, Chris is cheering for Coda.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the way forward.
Yeah,
that's the model.
I agree.
Yep.
I agree.
Yeah.
All right. Well, folks, be sure to check out the Star Wars library. By probably mid-February, they'll probably come out to making videos again. Spence is also a contributor to the expanduniverse.com. He'll write something again mid-February, probably for the site. So you don't want to miss that. Spence, anything else to add for your channel?
I don't think so, man. I think you got it. February, it
just
is.
That you're never coming back to this show again, who would just invite you and then sit here and insult you the whole time.
I know, and then just sit in my corner and cry with my phone. Like,
yes, and unless you email Kathleen Kennedy, Chris's channel's not coming back. So I need you to petition, folks. Go start a GoFundMe for this man. He's got to get his channel back.
My very defunct channel, which I'm thinking about bringing back. I think enough time's passed so that what I'm going to do is confuse everyone. And look, I mean, now that you're rereading the EU, there's nothing more for any of us to do, Matt. You've crowded us out of this space, and rightfully so. You are the king. But, look, I mean, I think it's I've dropped hints for years that, like, I'm a Trek guy and a Who guy or whatever. Yeah. I also, by the way, I was just about to, I won't torture you with this, but I also have everything in the Smallville continuity too. Reference books, comics, things like. I think it's time for me to expand my own expanded universe. I think it's time to, and we'll talk about Smallville next time.
Wow. Okay. So for myself, I'm going to have to figure out how to come up with $210 for 5 CDs from Highlander Big Finish.
Did you find it? Is it still there?
I know I see them, but 200. It's about $200 more than what I was willing to pay. I mean, to be honest, I'd probably pay $10 a CD. But just to show you, I've got my Watcher pendant on right now from Highlander. So I'm but awesome. $210.
Brutal. I know.
Back in the single days, that would have been sold. In the single days, that would have been so. In the world, in the days without the kids, that
Sure.
probably still
Sure.
might have happened. But
Sure.
in this day and age, that's $210. So anyway, folks, well, thanks a lot. Thank you for everyone for joining me here. And folks, we will see you next time on a more civilized